The front-facing camera on the Moto M is an 8 megapixel shooter with a 1.12 micron pixel size. It takes kind of decent photos, but let's talk about the features first. So this is the Chinese ROM, as I've been saying from the beginning. Down here you have a manual beautification slider that is always there depending on what you use. You can either use the automatic mode or the manual mode. It has 7 levels and it basically just adds a blur to the quality of the photo. And taking a look up here, you'll find some settings for fill light, the photo quality. You always want to make sure to switch to Ultra HD, which obviously fully uses or utilizes those 8 megapixels on here. It was set to standard at first. You got to remember that when using it. Snap mode actually gives you a bunch of different choices to use the selfie picture mode, and then there's the photo mirror feature where you'll be able to flip the screen around or the screen contents around to actually use the phone as a mirror. So when taking pictures, it does a decent performance. So on this picture, I've used my studio lighting right here, pointed it right at my face, so that should be ideal lighting in this case. And if you look close, you'll see a lot of blur going on. This is a general theme with the Moto M. There's a lot of blur on the cameras. I don't know if that's a software issue, but in this case, as you can see, all the hair on my face isn't the sharpest, and looking at my eyes, you see that they're pretty blurry too. So quality overall is not that great, especially in low light situations. You will definitely want to use another phone to take your selfie shots. And if you compare the quality of the front camera on the Moto M and the Moto G4 Plus, you will notice that color temperature seems a bit colder on the Moto M, and also in the details it seems to lack a little because all the hair is a bit finer in resolution on the Moto G4 Plus, in this case on my ugly face right here. So overall, the front camera isn't the greatest on the Moto M. It is still trumped by a bunch of other phones, but I mean, it's an 8 megapixel camera and it's a phone, so you gotta remember that when taking your pictures. It's decent, but it's not great at all. The camera on the Moto M is a 16 megapixel shooter that only has a 1 micron pixel size and does have a 2.0 aperture, which is pretty decent, but you can tell that it has some difficulties using those tiny pixels to actually take decent photos. So talk about the software first. You'll see that we have this triangular measuring tool here, so that helps you keep the phone straight basically. Focus seems to be pretty decent. It's not the fastest. It is face detection autofocus, so there's no laser autofocus on this device, but it's still pretty good. It's pretty quick actually for a device at this price point, so it takes just under a second for the device to focus, but there's a bunch of times when it definitely is having a hard time focusing, especially as soon as the light tends to fade away a little. Feature-wise, you are pretty well set up, so let's switch in here and you'll see there's a bunch of different modes back here. You can switch around on the resolution. There is a fingerprint shooting option, so as long as if you hold the fingerprint reader on the back, it will take a picture. There's the snapping mode, so you'll have to set up the touch timer, or you can set up a timer. It even recognizes smiles and takes a picture. You can switch to white balance, or you can switch the white balance. You can switch around on the ISO. You can turn on and off the leveling stuff that I showed you, and you have a bunch of different settings for the grid right there. The video resolution only goes up to full HD. I tend to think that's enough. Video quality isn't the greatest. It basically has the same problems as the regular camera part of the device. There's a bunch of other options, which is pretty nice, is the fact that you can turn off the snap sound, which isn't the most common thing. Well, at least there's a bunch of different manufacturers that do not have this feature. You can use the power buttons to zoom and start sounds, or you can even capture using those buttons. Let's go back out again because you have a Pro mode down here. So if you pick this menu, you can actually switch to the Pro mode, and that gives you a bunch of options to play around with aperture, ISO, timing and stuff. So yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of options you can use on this device. You can set the focus manually, switch around on the white balance and stuff. So there's a bunch of Pro mode features in here, so those work pretty well. There is HDR on this device, if I could only find it. Let me just quickly go back to the regular camera mode. So there's your HDR stuff. It does tend to blur the photos a bit more than is definitely necessary. And well, overall, I'm a bit disappointed with the camera because there is devices like the Moto G4, for example, that are not that much better on the spec sheet at least, or the Moto G4 Plus has the same 16 megapixel camera, at least on paper, but it's definitely a different sensor, and I'll show you why that is in a second. So if we go in here and switch through the gallery back to the low light photos, if you look at these low light photos, you'll notice there's a lot of grain going on there. So this has been shot just having my screen in the background. And as you can see, it does definitely have a lot of issues with noise on this device. Going further, there's a bunch of pictures I took outside, and you'll see that it's really struggling to get anything to look sharp in the background here. Looking at all the writing over there, that's totally blurry, and the stuff, this is actually the area I focused on. So as you can see, there is the software kicking in that's trying to help out a bit and make the photos look a bit better, but all it does is basically it makes it more muddy, and this is definitely not a good camera to be used in low lighting. Let's go further back and try and find a bunch of shots I took in the sun. So this has been this afternoon. I have to admit, Germany or Berlin doesn't get much light these days because it's winter over here, and yes, it's mostly dark. So this is actually a very famous mosaic that is on a building in the city center, and usually you would be able to see all these tiny tiles that they've used on there to build this. And as this is a 16 megapixel camera and this is used in the sun, I mean the sun is strictly straight shining onto that building right there. I'm very disappointed with the image quality on this device actually, because the software actually makes it all muddy in this case. Looking at stuff that is a bit worsely lit, you'll see this does turn out pretty well actually. It's more of a contrast thing going on here, so the lines are a bit blurred out, and overall again muddy, but still this is a photo which is not that common on this device that did turn out not too bad. Looking at this photo taken in a supermarket, I noticed that it tends to darken the photos. This has been very well lit actually, but if you look at the photo right here, it has toned it down quite a lot. And again, the software is kicking in heavily, at least on the picture part of this can right here. So over here, it's all muddy, and the font actually comes out pretty nice. The contrast on the font seems pretty nice. Color-wise, color reproduction isn't the best. It tends to be a bit warm. It switches a lot, around a lot. So the quality could definitely be better. This is another picture from the supermarket. Again, super well lit area, but again, it looks a bit dull and a bit like darkened after. I'll give you a comparison to the Moto G4 Plus in a second. And overall, the camera really seems to struggle with sharpness at a certain distance. So there's only a certain area where the device actually is able to take really kind of sharp shots. Overall, the photos are really not that great at all. I have to admit, I'm coming from a high-end phone, in this case the Huawei Mate 9. This is the Christmas tree in the shopping center there. Over here we have some pretty decent detail on those tree parts there. It looks pretty much okay, at least considering the fact of this being in a shopping center where the lighting doesn't tend to be this great. Looking at this machine at the train station I was at earlier, you'll see that this area right here is actually where I focused, and again it is pretty muddy and it has some serious issues taking decent photos. And on here on this metal part, you'll see that the software is really wrecking the photo basically, and they're kicking in some heavy algorithm stuff going on there that definitely doesn't help making this picture any better at all. This is a photo taken out in the sun just to try to get this font right. This has been about 1.5 meters away from the this piece of stone on the wall basically, and again it's very muddy in this case, and the software really doesn't do a good job of keeping these photos in any way usable. Looking at this graffiti, again, same problem. It's all a bit mushed and muddied. by the software, I hope, at least, because I'm just really hoping for the international ROM to be a bit better. This has been this afternoon in my city right here in Berlin, and again, same stuff going on back here. This whole tree is just one massive blob of blur and not really a good picture at all. And I've really tried to make the device kind of like at least try and get some good points out of it. And again, looking at this number plate back here, it's all just a huge mess of really not a good quality. I'll give you a comparison about this. So keep in mind those photos I just showed you, and let me get the Moto M out. Just open up the gallery, move past the selfie shots here. And this is a low light shot taken on the Moto M. Let me just try and get this bigger to give you a bit of a comparison here. So this looks a bit more or a bit less blurred. So overall the pixelation is just not there. The software is making a much more smooth picture looking at the Moto M that all was very crisply. There was a lot of pixels going on and there's a lot of artifacts to be seen there. It's still not a great photo. I mean, this is just a 5 megapixel camera in this case. This is actually a photo where you can see that the Moto M does have some potential in it, because this is even more muddy. That's the same place I was in with the Moto M earlier, and again this was the area I focused, all blurred out. So yeah, both cameras are not really good. The Moto G4 Plus has a 16 megapixel camera too, same issue there. But here's the thing. This is where it really shows that the Moto M is definitely struggling in some cases. So look at this mosaic right here. As you can see, there's all these tiny small bits and pieces that they've used to put together this mural right there. And on the Moto G4, those are clearly visible. If you go over to the Moto M, let me just quickly get this up in the background here. Let me try and find it for you. And there we have it. So looking at these shots side by side, let me just quickly get this close up. And as you can see, the Moto M is all a big mess, while the Moto G4 Plus is definitely capable of having you or letting you see some of this stuff that's used on the wall there. I mean, this is all just a huge mess. I don't know what Motorola has been doing there, but the software is definitely super crappy in the algorithm part on the Moto M cameras right here. It's the same for video. I don't even bother to show you that. They both shoot 1080p videos. The Moto G4 Plus wasn't great at it. The Moto M is even worse. Another thing is the temperature on the camera. So it does tend to heat up quite a bit when using the camera. So let me just point this infrared thermometer at it right here, and as you can see, this is already crossing the 38, 39 something threshold there. So it's getting pretty warm just looking at the pictures, actually, because I haven't really been using the camera lately. And as you can see, it tends to get quite warm even just using the camera. So the camera is definitely a low point on the Moto M, which is pretty sad, because overall the spec sheet looks really good. In this case, it really fails on the camera, at least in my opinion.